like to introduce you to building real-time applications with Firebase. So those of you who haven't thought of all of your ideas, or those of you who have, save a space for a real-time idea because they're super cool. Hi, my name's Kat. I'm a software engineer at Firebase. This is my email. You can email me if you have any questions if you decide to use Firebase. Or if you just want to chat, I'm open to that too. We're a team of about 24 people. We were acquired by Google October of last year, but we're still working as a team. We're still building out Firebase, and we're trying to make it the best it can be for developers new and experienced to build out and scale out their applications. So on today's agenda, I'm going to start out with what real-time is, why it's hard, how Firebase can make it simple. I'll do some live coding, and that'll actually be after the Q&A, I think, and some real-world examples to give you a taste of what applications people have made using Firebase and the scale that it can get to. So why should we make real-time websites? What's that even mean? Well, it means that data is best served fresh. So if you're trying to do anything, you want your data to be as fresh as possible. You don't want reviews of a restaurant 20 years ago, right? If it's within the last year, you want that data. It's more useful, it's more valuable to you. Another example of this is you might want to know where your bus is. That you probably want to catch in real time. If you're 5 minutes late, your bus is gone, right? So the blue ones here are the MBTA buses. The red ones you might recognize as tech shuttles. And so the buses basically are updated via NextBus. So this is as good as NextBus is. And if you guys know how good NextBus is, I know I've had some issues with them, but this will give you an idea of how many ones are there and where you should go to catch your #1 bus. There's also collaborative drawing. So if those of you with your laptops open and you're not doing anything, if you want to go to tinyurl.com/MIT-draws, you can come draw and it'll show up here. So I'll give you guys a second. If you can add to my beautiful Firebase. Right, and so I don't know how many of you are drawing here, but someone's cleared by beautiful MIT. All right, I'm going to put that away for now. Go to the next slide. You guys can play with that later. Or if you want collaborative drawing, you can add it to whatever you're doing. Real-time is also cryptocurrency prices. So all of these, the buses and the cryptocurrency prices have been part of our open data set. And so Firebase makes one of our goals to basically add real-time open data sets. One of these is the cryptocurrency. And so we have Bitcoin and a couple other ones. And so when the price goes up, maybe it jumps $500 and you're like, oh man, I gotta, convert all my Bitcoins into real dollars now. So, but real-time is a little complex. There's a lot of problems to solve. If you're starting out as a new developer, you're like, wow, that's super cool, but that's probably years down the line. I have to build my app first, I have to get my users first, I have to put in my data first, build my schemas first. Well, what else do you have to worry about? You have to worry about transport. What that means is the normal web, you deal with request response. But now if you want real time, you have to open a socket. And this was a word that I heard in your presentation just now. It's something that sounds advanced, right? You have to worry about keeping the connection open between your browser and your server. You have to figure out what data you're sending across it. You have to figure out if different data comes, how are you going to merge it together? You have to worry about networks. So if you're trying to build a real-time website, but suddenly the internet goes out, what in the world happens? You're writing data and suddenly you can no longer access the server. How do you store up that data so that when you access the server again, you can send it straight to the server? Or, when you come back online, don't you want to get the data that was created by other people while you were offline? That's another problem. And if you scale your website so big that you decide you want an iOS app and an Android app, how are you going to do that? You're going to have to build out something new and a new data transport layer and worry about the networks on these sorts of mobile devices where it goes up and down very quickly. And you have to worry about different platforms. And once you get to scale, well, you might have a picture like this where you have many servers, some clusters, a bunch of databases, and you have to send your data everywhere. And how do you know whether or not your data is in sync just within your app? So this is where Firebase steps in. if you store your data with Firebase, the guarantees we want to make it for you is that you can sync it to a bunch of devices. And I know you guys are web focused, but that might be mobile web, that might be web on your laptops. In any case, you might have a bunch of clients or devices connected to your Firebase, and they all want to access the same data. And we want to make it so that it's possible to do that really quickly. We want to get you running out the door with real-time as fast as possible. So a little bit of JavaScript code, and I'll walk through this. So here's how you would write data. Over here I say var ref, that's just creating a variable, and I say new Firebase. This is basically creating an object, which is a Firebase reference, and the URL I'm passing here is a reference to a particular Firebase URL. I'll show you guys a little more about this later, but this URL, if you access it, you can actually go there now if you have your laptops open. You'll see that there's nothing there, right? But it's a data view. And you can type things there, you can add different children there. You guys just learned about NoSQL, and so that is the format that Firebase uses. If you type in a JSON object, it'll get converted into Firebase data. You can do ref.set, and that basically sets the value of something, and here I just said hello MIT. So if you open up your developer console on that, and you type in if you type in these two lines, you'd be able to actually write to the Firebase reference right there. Then to read it back out, the idea is we don't want to just request the data and read it once, right? This is the traditional database model where you request the data from the database, and the database says, this is your data. Instead, what we want to do is we want to request the database to say, every time I get a new update, tell me about it. So here I say, whenever the value changes, not just what is the value right now, but whenever the value changes, I want to get a snapshot of that data. What does that data look like right now? And I want to say, okay, I want to get the value of that snapshot. There's a couple of other methods on snapshot, but if you want to get the value of it, and in this case, if you've done this right after the line above, it would say ref.set hello MIT. Your value would be hello MIT, and you would console.log hello MIT. And later on, we'll have a live coding session and a little workshop so you guys can experience this more. So I don't know how many of these images are familiar to you, but Firebase works with all of these. So here we have Android, we have iOS, it actually also works with iOS 8. We work with Mac OS, we work with Angular. I don't know if you guys have done a lecture on that, right? Yeah. Ember.js, and there's like a bunch of other things, Node.js, Java, JavaScript, the whole gambit of things. We're working to create real-time clients that basically work with them. And for those of those clients that don't have real-time, like Ruby or Python, we haven't had time to develop those yet. We do have a streaming REST API, which is a little bit less beautiful to work with. So I would definitely recommend JavaScript. But if you are going with a Python or Ruby route, and you do want to have some real-time aspect to it, you can also add that. I'd also like to mention, a lot of this is toward client-side development. So you load a page in the browser, and that accesses your Firebase directly. However, if you have something where you do want a back-end server, maybe your logic is super complicated, or you want to do something that has to use a server, you can also plug Firebase into your server, grab the data from the server, update that to your Firebase, and then your client can also grab that data, which you want in real time. So this works with just like from the client side. If you just want the database from the client side, it also works if you're working with the server. So here are some of the helpful goodies that come with Firebase. First of all, I've already mentioned you can sync your data. Another good one is auth and security. So some of the things you mentioned before, for MongoDB, you have to do validation of the types of data that you're storing. You want to make sure that every author has a name or something like that. You can do that with security and validation rules. For auth, you have social auth, you have email auth, right? You have anonymous auth. So if you don't care, who your user is, you don't want their email, you don't want their Facebook, but you do want some idea of this is one user and this user created these games or these reviews or whatever. You can use anonymous auth, which basically says for this browser session, for this computer, this person is going to be known as anonymous, and they have some silly guest ID. Right? Otherwise, you can use email, you can use Twitter, GitHub, Facebook, Google, it goes on. For open data sets, the bus data, we have the cryptocurrency data, we have airport delays data, and earthquake data, and a couple more other open data sets in case you're looking for an open data set to work with. And finally, we also have hosting. The cool thing about hosting is a lot of Firebase developers said, okay, this is great. Firebase has taken away my need to run my own server, but how do I serve my web pages? You know, I still need a server to do that. So we decided to build out Firebase hosting. This basically is a content distributed network backed hosting. What that means is you put your website on Firebase hosting and you automatically get a CDN. That just means that, you know, if someone's in Boston, they can go to Boston servers to get their data. If someone's in California, they can go to California servers to get their data. And you can get your data much quicker across the CDN. If there's outages with your server, the CDN has it distributed across a wide variety, and so you have backups in case one of the servers goes down. And your website will remain up. So at Firebase, we love developers. We have a bunch of developer outreach. We go to a bunch of hackathons. We do events like this. We want developers to, we want to empower developers and build awesome apps. So, you know, if you have any questions, ask us, and we'll help answer them as best we can. So I'm actually going to save this to the end. We're going to skip on to the fact that Firebase, you know, may look like a toy, but it actually works for big projects too. And so I'd like to just highlight a couple of those. One of them is for CBS uses Firebase. CBS uses Firebase for this show called Big Brother, where you can watch people and you can chat with people. And so we have here like a little chat that's embedded in the website, and so you can watch the show and chat with people. We have 50,000 concurrents at peak. That means there's 50,000 people connected at one time. Not just 50,000 users, but 50,000 people connected at one time. And we have over 27 million chat messages posted for Big Brother. And this is just one little segment of Firebase. We also back Roll20. So if any of you play tabletops and you've decided that you don't want to roll physical dice, and you don't want to move physical tokens, or you want to play with someone across the US, someone in Texas maybe, you can use Roll20, which is a virtual tabletop game, and it uses Firebase as the backend. So you can use it to chat, you move around your monsters and your people. Reviewable is a relatively new site. It does GitHub code reviews, and this is also backed by Firebase. They basically are a one-person team, a two-person team. And they said, how are we going to make our website as fast as possible? We don't want to deal with servers going down and figuring out all of these things, so we're going to use Firebase. And so what they do is GitHub code reviews. You can collaborate with each other, and it basically gives you a different view for pull requests on GitHub. There's a bunch of other case studies. There's Twitch TV. One of the cool things I like to say about Twitch is the first time we hit 1 million concurrents was actually because of Twitch TV. It was part of the Dota Internationals, and while that was going on, everyone was chatting on the chats and was getting notified, and so Firebase crept up to 1 million concurrents, which is 1 million people connected to our servers at the same time. That was a super exciting day. One of the cool uses is Warby Parker. This has nothing to do with web, but I like to showcase it to show what are the other different things that you can do with Firebase. What they did is they have these pneumatic tubes, and so you go up to Warby Parker, you're like, hi, I'd like to buy some glasses, and they say, okay, what would you like to order? You put in your order, they type it in, and there's a pneumatic tube, and whoop, out comes your glasses. They powered that with Firebase. They figure out what you want and, use Firebase for that. If you've heard of Coffee Meets Bagel, if you haven't, it's a dating app, so if you want a date, maybe you should try it out. But they use Firebase for their chat instead of using SMS because they realize that going to SMS is a context switch for mobile, and they wanted people to stay within their app. All right, so these are the things we talked about, minus the live coding. I'll go into that next. We talked about what real-time is, how real-time is complex. We talked about how Firebase fits into the picture. I'll do a little bit of live coding next, and we'll be going over some real-world examples. So this is not quite the end. This is the end of this slideshow. These are where the slides are. I welcome you to try Firebase. But this next thing here, Cloud Chat, I'd like to do a little workshop with you guys if you guys are interested to just build out a simple application, a simple chat application to give you a sense of what real-time can do. And so while this is a chat application, there's a bunch of other things you can do. You can push out comments in real time, reviews in real time. You know, if you're updating the weather, if you're building a game, you might want the scoreboard in real time. And I'd just like to open it right now to if anyone has questions on anything I presented so far. Yeah?
This is a really dumb question, but what does the Firebase logo mean?
Yeah, all right, let's go to the Firebase logo. So here we have basically these 3 circles are basically disks. So that's kind of a traditional image of what a database looks like. And on top, you can't quite see it, but we've kind of taken the Firefox tail and put it on top. And so that's Yes?
Other than your website, are there any sources you recommend of documentation?
Our website's actually a great source of documentation. There are a bunch of examples on the website. The docs go in depth about like how you use different things. So I definitely recommend the website. There are a bunch of tutorials, especially if you want to use something like AngularJS or Ember.js. There's a lot of like online tutorials about that too. Yeah.
How would you guys compare yourself to like frameworks like Parse that also do stuff like this?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of other ones. I can like name one for every large company. So Parse is from Facebook, and let's see, there's other ones like Dropbox also has an API for storing your data in Dropbox, and there's a bunch of other ones. For Parse in particular, Parse does allow you to have a back end, right? Without actually running your own servers, and they have a lot of support around extra features. What Firebase has on top of that is the real-time feature. So with Parse, you do still have to do the request and get the response, and if you want new data, you have to request it again and get the response. For Firebase, you just open up that connection, and whenever there's new data, you get notified about it. Any other questions?
Here.
Yes?
How would you compare it to the Dropbox data store?
Yeah, so the Dropbox data store is also a similar thing where one of the things we do is we provide a certain format for your files. Not really. We provide like a JSON format, and if you use the JSON format, we provide you with a bunch of querying capabilities across the different children nodes that you have. And so it's kind of a tree structure. With Dropbox, you can store and sync files. And so if you know what your file format is, you can do that, but you can't really query within a file as easily. Any other questions? All right, so in that case, I welcome you guys to open up github.com/catfang/livecloudchat, and we'll go through this. This basically is just a chat demo. It looks like this, and you can float it, you can fork it, you can download the zip, and any of these will work. And to give you an idea of what actually we're building, here's the demo. And so just in this cloud chat, you can enter your name, and you can chat. You can say 6470 is awesome, and it shows up. And if any of you were on the same URL, you'd see that appear. So we're going to build that out together. If you're a speedster and you're like working at your own pace, what I'm going to do here is take tutorial.html. Actually, I'm going to take the one in the JavaScript folder, tutorial.javascript. It starts out as an empty file, and it starts out as the same as phase 0. We're going to go through phase 1, which is adding the chat capabilities, and if we have time, I don't know that we do, we'll try to add authentication to it too. All right. So how are people with downloading the application or the zip? Good? More time? More time. Okay, I'll give a little bit more time. Maybe I should have told you guys to do this before questions. Any other questions? I can tell you lots of things. So a cool story I like to say is this Firebase actually came out of a chat application. The co-founders pivoted toward more general data model, but they started out actually with chat, and they got to talk to a bunch of movie stars and songwriters and artists to basically have chat on their website so that their fans could chat with them. And they couldn't quite get the second round of funding for that, so what they decided to do was turn a little bit and generalize it, because they found out that people were trying to put chat in their games and then push game data through it. And they're like, well, that's not really chat, but I guess it's basically the same model. So that's kind of where Firebase came from and a little bit of its history. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I actually forgot some pieces of paper, so I'm going to run up the stairs. Never mind, I'm going to wait. All right. So here we have the tutorial, and I'm going to cheat and basically grab some code from here. So the first thing we're going to do is create a reference to our Firebase. And so that would look like this. And if I make a typo, like, shout at me, because if I don't find it right away, it's going to take forever to find it. So really shout at me if I make a typo. So we're going to create a new reference, and we're going to pass it a URL. In this case, I'm going to use the URL cloudchat.firebase.io -demo.com. And so if I go to this URL, you'll see that what the data looks like. So right now you see these weird -J's. This is what the data looks like. In here we have the name and we have the text. And the -J's are basically like indexing into an array. Right? So for normal arrays you would do 0, 1, 2, 3. But when you have 100 people on your Firebase at the same time, and everyone says, I'm the first person, who are you going to write 0 to? So what this does is it takes a mixture of the timestamp and who the user is, and it generates a unique timestamp, sort of a timestamp for where to insert that value. So this is ordered by time, if you do it alphabetically or ordered by string, basically. And here you can see each one of these items has a name and a text. So that's what's in our Firebase right now. To give you an idea of what we're starting out with, if you were to go to your page, here, I'll go to my actual page. We're starting out with something like this, where if we try to type something, it doesn't quite work out. If we try to type something, we press enter, nothing happens. So that's our page right now. So here I've created a messages reference. All right, so the next step is we're going to register some DOM elements. And so this is going to use some jQuery. Very minimal jQuery, but basically we want to get our username, which is the element with the ID username. And so this is just an input box. Sorry, I missed the var. We also want to get the new message. And so that is whenever someone types in a new message. We also want to get the messages, which is where we want to show the messages in our website. All right. So once we've done that, we can actually load our messages from Firebase. And so this is going to show us, basically, when we get new messages, they'll show up here. All right, so to do this, we basically want to use our messages reference that we defined up here, and we want to limit it to the last 10. This basically says that, we'll have a sliding window, we'll only show the last 10. If you want to show the last 100, go ahead, add another 0. If you don't want to limit it, you don't have to. But showing the last 10 makes it snappy, and you can just see what's relevant right now. You can do on, and so that basically starts listening to the data, and we'll do a child added event. What that means is we saw the data over here, all of these items have basically, this is one child, this is another child, and this is another child of our root reference. And so whenever a child gets added, that means if this item here gets added, it gets called once for this item. When it gets added, it gets called for once when this item gets added, and will get called over and over again for each time someone adds a chat message. And then we'll want to pass in a function, and this function will take a snapshot. And so this is our callback. So when we call the callback, it's basically saying we have new data. Here's the snapshot of the new data, and this is the new child object. So we want to unwrap the data from the snapshot. So here we want to get the data from the snapshot's value. And then we want to be able to get the username and the message that got added to our Firebase. So here's the username. We want to get the name of it. If the name doesn't exist, they didn't put in a username, that's okay. We'll give them a default. So here's just or anonymous. And this basically says, when we get back the snapshot value, if they didn't put in a name, it's going to be null. And if it's null, that basically evaluates to false. So if it evaluates to false, then we'll put in anonymous of the name. Oh yeah, absolutely. So once we get the username, we also want the message. So here the snapshot, the value of the snapshot is a JSON object. On it we have the name and the text because that's what's stored in our Firebase. Later on, we're going to want to make sure when we actually store a new chat message that we make sure that it has a username saved in the name field, and it has the message saved in the text field. All right, how are people doing with this so far? Good? All right, so now we want to do a little bit of manipulation of the DOM to create the message and sanitize the text and print it out. So here we're just going to create our elements. We're going to say something. We're going to create a list item. And for the name, we're going to make it bolded. And here's just a class that we're using to style things. And so that will be our names element. Then we'll want to set the text of both the name and our message. So for our name element, we want to set the text to be the username. And for the message element, we want to set the text to be the message. And before the message, we're going to prepend it with the name element. So this here says I'm creating a message element, which is a list item. I'm also creating a name element, which is bolded, that's strong, and I'm giving it a class for styling. I'm going to set the text of the name element. I'm also going to set the text of the message element, and before the text, I want to set the name. All right, so if we take this, we want to actually add the element now that we've created it. So here we're using messages. Remember we had messages defined up here, and we grabbed it from our jQuery. We used jQuery to grab it from the DOM based on the fact that its ID was messages. And here we want to just append our message element. So this will add it to the end. And then, so that we can see all the new messages as they come in, we're going to scroll to the bottom. basically says set the top of our scroll box to be the scroll height of the element. And that basically says scroll it all the way down to the bottom. So now, if we go back to our page and we refresh it, we'll see that the data is there. You'll notice that this is different from the one I was showing you before. And that's because, oh, people chatted here. That's because this is pointed to a different Firebase. This one is pointed to Firebase livecloudchat.firebase.io.com. And while I can go to it and see the data, you guys, if you open it up, it'll say, hey, you're not allowed, you have to ask to be a collaborator. Instead of doing that, I'm using, oops, not that one. I'm using a demo, so there's a dash demo at the end of this. You guys will be able to open that up and actually see the messages when they come in. All right, so this one is pulling from the demo Firebase. So we haven't written anything extra to it. This is just what I stored there previously. But now you can see that this is showing up. Are people following along? Are people getting to this point? Does anyone need more time? Awesome, let's move on. So now that we've made it so that we can listen to new chat messages, we want to be able to write our own chat messages. So to do that, we want to check on new message. Whenever the key gets pressed, we want to find out what that key press is. And so basically, whenever enter gets pressed, we want to send off that message. So first we want to get the field values. And that's just basically saying we want to get the username in the message. We say that the username is from previously we grabbed the username's DOM element and now we're getting the value from it. Here we want to get the new message's value. We're going to trim it, just take out the white spaces at the end. And then we'll check whether or not to save the message based on whether or not an enter button was pressed. So save message when enter is pressed. And we'll basically want to check the key code. So this here says, if I press the enter button, which has key code 13, you can test this out on your own if you're trying to find out what the key for enter is or things like that. There's lots of resources on the web that can help you with that, or shift enter or whatever combinations you want. And checking messages.length is basically just to check that you've actually typed something. So if you've typed an empty message, we don't really want to store it. All right, so now we're going to use our messages.ref again. And here we're going to use push. And so push is what's going to generate that random -j string, right? And we want to add a JSON object, right? And here we want one of the values to be name. And under name, we want to store the username. And we want the other value, we want to store our message under the value text. And this, again, is related to, I don't want to scroll too high, but when we retrieved our messages out of the Firebase, we looked at the snapshot's value, and we grabbed out the name for the username and the text for the message. So here we want to do the same thing. We want to push the name, the username into the name, and we want to push the message into the text. All right. And then we just want to clear out the new message field so that we're ready to type in a new message if we want to. Oh man, people are already chatting. So if I refresh this, and I type in my name, and I full screen it so I can type in the box at the bottom. Oh, mine's not working, so let's go debug it. What did I do wrong? Well, I can get other people's messages, so part of it's working. All right, so let's check the console. Does it say anything interesting? Type in the name. Type in the message. Okay, well, you guys got yours working. I messed something up, so let's go check it out. got theirs working. Someone did. I saw new messages. Who got it working? All right. In that case, who can find my bug? All right. Let's see if we can figure out if this is getting pressed. Ah, good call. All right, let's try that. There you go. All right, good call. Who said that? Who found the fix? Awesome. All right, so if you followed along, I'll go back to the code. Since you guys can all run the little chat demo on your own computer and see everyone else chatting. This basically gets us through adding messages when they get added to the Firebase, whenever new messages gets added. This also gets us through if on our own clients we set a username and we set a message, we can also add that to the Firebase and that gets added. All of this is on the GitHub. So don't worry if you didn't grab all of the code. If you're still interested in adding chat or some other kind of real-time capabilities to your site, that's totally possible too. It's only 2 o'clock, so I went through this really fast. We can keep going. I have user authentication if that's something you're interested in, or I can take, I can break here for a little extra questions too. All right, everyone followed along? Awesome, all right. Who wants to keep going? Adding user authentication. All right, let's do it. All right, so here this comment is just saying I'm creating a root reference for our authentication. You don't actually need to. You can use any reference that's referencing your Firebase. Oh, wait. In order to do this, we're going to have to jump to the other Firebase. The reason for this is because for demo applications, we're not going to be able to add GitHub authentication and Twitter authentication because we aren't going to be able to add our credentials. What that looks like on the website is if I go to demo, you'll notice I only have data here. But if I go to livecloudchat.firebase.io.com, you'll notice I get a bunch of these other things. I get this thing called security rules. I get a thing called simulator. I get a thing called analytics, and I can see how many people are connected to my Firebase at a time. I can check my user login and authentication. And so this is a key thing that's missing from the demo app that is in our Firebase. So we're going to have to scroll back to the top, and we're going to take out the dash demo at the end, have it at Firebase.io, and we're going to add live-cloud-chat in front. And so this will just make it so that it points to a Firebase, which actually allows for authentication because it's not just a demo. All right. I'll pause here for a couple seconds so that you guys can catch that, since this is necessary in order to add authentication. All right. So I'm actually going to write it back over here in case you missed it. It's pointing to the same place, and I'm going to use this for authentication. This basically, again, is a reference. They're super lightweight, so even though I created 2, that's all right. The bulk of the work, that is the Firebase reference, is shared between all of the instances pointed to the same base URL. So even if I added, to access children, I could do this. If I had a user's reference or messages, if I had a messages reference, that would all point to the same base object. And so it's sharing a lot of the same resources, so it's all right to just keep on creating references. All right, so once I have my root ref, the first thing I want to do is listen for authentication changes. That basically means whenever a user gets logged in or logged out, I want to hear about it and I want to act on that. So to do that, on my root ref, I do an on-auth. And so this basically listens for auth events. I'll pass it another callback, which takes in the auth data. And so each time on-auth is called, it'll get past the auth data, and the auth data will be null if the user's logged out, or if the user's logged in, I'll get a bunch of interesting information. So we'll first deal with the case if the user is logged in. So we'll want to make sure that it's not null. And if the user is logged in, we want to get the display name. And so because Facebook has a display name, but GitHub has a username unless you set your name, we're going to do the same OR thing we did with Anonymous to check for a display name or a username. So auth data here. And another one of the fields is auth data provider. This basically says whether they were logged in with Twitter, Facebook, GitHub, Google. And here we'll want to grab the display name. And if there's no display name, we're going to grab the username. I might need to put this on one line. Yikes. Line goes more. Oh, that didn't help. All right. All right, so I'm grabbing the display name or the username. I want to set that as the username field. So this will just show me what my name is. If I log in with GitHub, it'll show CatFang as my GitHub username in the username field, and we'll grab that later on when we're posting new messages. And here's a little bit of DOM manipulation to hide the login buttons and show a logout button. And so here I'm adding a class. It says hidden. This just has display none in the CSS styling. If you guys have you guys been introduced to CSS? All right, so display none basically hides the element. We no longer want to show the login buttons, but we do want to show the logout button. And so we'll remove the class hidden. All right. Then we'll want to deal with if the user is logged out. So if the user is logged out, we want to do the reverse with the buttons, right? And we also want to clear the username field. So here the user is logged out. We want to clear the username field. And then we want to show the login buttons and hide the logout button. All right, how are people doing? All right, so here we have our root reference. We check what our authentication state is. Whenever the authentication state changes, we call this callback function that we passed in. When the callback gets called, we pass in the auth data, or Firebase will provide you the auth data. The auth data has a bunch of interesting fields on it. One of it is the provider that'll tell you what they logged in with. Based on the provider, we'll be able to get their display name or username. Once we get the username, we can display it to them. Then we'll just toggle the state of the logged in and the logged out buttons. And if the user's logged out, we'll just basically clear the username and show the login button so that they can log in with their favorite social provider. All right. So now we actually want to register our DOM elements for authentication. This is basically, I created these buttons. Over here, you see the Twitter icon, the GitHub icon, and the Facebook icon, and I just want to make them buttons so that you can actually click them and authenticate. So to make that easy, we're just going to register a couple objects again. So that's for Facebook, and I'm going to copy it for the other providers. I'm also also going to add one for my logout button. All right, so these are just the buttons that I want to use. What we actually used here was a library called Font Awesome, which just provides you with Twitter icons and GitHub icons and pretty much all of the icons you could possibly want. And then it also provided a sign out button, which I used for the logout button. All right, so once we register our DOM elements, we actually want to create some logic. So we're going to have a helper login function. A lot of the functionality is the same when you use Firebase to authenticate with social providers. So we're going to create a little helper method to help us log in based on which social provider we want to use. So here we can do login as a function. We'll store a function in it. It will take in the provider. Based on the provider, we'll use our root reference to auth with OAuth redirect. So that's a mouthful that basically says we want to authenticate using OAuth, and we're going to use redirect. You can also use the pop-up option if you replace redirect with pop-up. I'm a fan of redirect because it works in the cases where you don't, have pop-ups enabled, which is a lot of people nowadays. Interestingly enough, if you want to make your website for mobile as well, iOS has this cool feature in Safari where window.close no longer works. So if you open a pop-up, it's pretty hard to actually close it again without having the user press the little X. So we're going to use redirect. We'll pass in the provider, and this again takes a callback. Here we're checking whether it errored or if we got the auth data. The auth data will be null if there's an error. If there is no error, then we'll get the same auth data that we would have gotten when we called onAuth, when we get passed it to onAuth. So if there is an error, we'll just log the error. If there isn't an error, we'll just say successfully logged in. And we're just storing this in the console log. It doesn't matter too much. So once we've done all that, the last thing we need to do is actually register it with our DOM elements. All right. So there's that code. And for Facebook login, we just want to register on click. We would just want to log in with Facebook. All right, and so this function here basically says when the Facebook button gets clicked, we want to call this function login. And I'll put it on multiple lines so it's clear. When the Facebook login gets clicked, we want to call this function. All this function does is it calls our helper function, which passes in Facebook as the provider. It will authenticate with Facebook using redirect, and then when it comes back to our page, our auth data will have changed because our authentication state will have changed. And this will trigger, we'll have a new display name show up. All right, so that's Facebook. And to quickly do it for the other ones, we have GitHub and Twitter. And finally, for the logout button, we're going to do a slightly different function since we're not logging in anymore. We want to unauthenticate, and we again need to do this through Firebase. So this basically is taking our root reference again, and instead of saying authenticate, we're doing an unauthenticate instead. All right, how are people doing? Do people need more time? All right. To just show you what that looks like, oh man, Edgar Allan Poe is a prolific All right, so if I were to log in with GitHub, oh, maybe I need a refresh. Oh man, here we go again. Login failed, no login transports available. good. What did I pass in? All right. Line 100, 29. Right there. All right, so this is getting called let's check what the provider is. If I click this again, GitHub should work. All right, let's put this in here. Let's do a pop-up. All right, let's make sure that that's set up properly. Nope. All right, well, what if we try Twitter? Nope. All right. If I show you this one, you can see that this uses, I can log in with GitHub, and it'll show cat bang, and I'll be able to log out again. There's apparently some bug in this, and I'll look over it. Or if any of you can find it, that's awesome. I'll leave this code up. It's also on GitHub, and I guess that only took 15 minutes, so I can spend another 15 minutes debugging, but that's not really interesting.